Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an event of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. The man we now know as Kraven the Hunter was born Sergei Kravinoff in Volgograd in the early 20th century. The son of wealthy Russian aristocrats, he seemingly spent much of his childhood living a privileged life in St. Petersburg. His father, the Grand Duke Nikolai Kravinoff, was respected by Tsar Nicholas himself, while his mother, the Grand Duchess Anna Makarova Kravinoff, was considered a wise woman with admirable grace and heart, who took great pride in the Kravinoff family's 6 generations of service to the Russian monarchy. Behind the scenes, however, things were less idyllic than they appeared, as Nikolai was an alcoholic who abused his child and slept with the servant woman Sonia Smerdyakov. And so while Sergei endured his father's beatings, he took his frustration out on Sonia's son, Dmitri, regarding him as little more than a boot-licking toady. Dmitri, meanwhile, had no idea that he was the illegitimate son of Nikolai Kravinoff, making him and Sergei half-brothers. Furthermore, Sergei's abuses caused Dmitri to repress his childhood memories along with his very identity, and his mind constructed a false narrative in which he and Sergei had been close friends. Although when Dmitri was young, he left the Kravinoff estate with a man named Gustav Fiers, who recognized the boy's budding mastery of disguise. In any event, the downfall of the Kravinoff family really began in 1917 with the socio-political upheaval of the Bolshevik Revolution. With the aristocracy removed from power, the Kravinoff family fled in disgrace, first to the United Kingdom before ultimately settling in America. Exiled from his homeland, Nikolai Kravinoff's drinking only got worse until it finally drowned him. Anna Makarova, meanwhile, was shattered by the Tsar's fall, and her behavior grew increasingly erratic until she was declared insane and institutionalized. Lacking the wealth they once had, she was committed to a squalid, insect-infested asylum, the haunting image of which stuck with her son throughout the years. Truly alone for the first time, a young Sergei Kravinoff left New York and spent several years traveling the world, usually by stowing away on trains and cargo ships. On his journeys, he visited major cities across Europe and Asia, but it was during his passage through equatorial Africa that he discovered a natural affinity for big game hunting. Then, after reaching adulthood and returning to New York City in the 1920s, Sergei Kravinoff met a woman who would change his life, Aja-Orisha. Born in the hidden African nation of Wakanda, when Aja was a child, she was chosen to join a secluded order of female mystics called the Balu Aye. She was raised by the women there and learned their rituals, incantations, and healing arts. However, as she grew up, she also began to wonder what else there was to see in the world. But after turning 18, Aja-Orisha was called to undergo a rite known as the Yansan-An ritual. In this, she was asked to renounce any life outside of the Balu Aye. Pensively agreeing, she chewed on sacred herbs and drank a specific potion that placed her body into a state resembling death, in which even her breathing halted. She was buried for 2 weeks, during which her mind was still active, allowing her to hunt down and confront her own inner demons. Initially, she believed the purpose of this was to defeat them, but ultimately realized that her true task was to honor and make peace with her own flaws and desires. Once she did that, her body resurrected and Aja-Orisha rose again. Like the other Balu Aye, this drastically slowed her aging, affording her a significantly longer lifespan. However, confronting her inner demons also meant that she needed to honor and accept her growing wanderlust, and about a year later she decided to leave to explore the world, even though doing so meant that she could never return to Wakanda. Her travels eventually brought her to Harlem in New York, where she fell in love with a man named Dr. Henry McKay. The two were caught up in a whirlwind romance, marrying within weeks of their first meeting, and while this ended in tragedy when Henry died only 2 months later, their union left Aja with a son named Takar. This brings us back to the story at hand, as in the 1920s, Aja-Orisha met the exiled Russian nobleman Sergei Kravinoff. Sergei befriended Aja, and the two grew close quickly. Her son, Takar, looked up to Sergei, who quickly became a surrogate father figure and treated the boy far more kindly than his own father had treated him. Meanwhile, Aja sensed that Sergei had the potential to become something great. When the United States fell into a Great Depression, she took him back to Africa and tried to impart the wisdom of the Baluaye onto him. She tried to teach him that the animals there were to be learned from and not to be harmed, but his desire to hunt sometimes got the better of him. Despite this, she believed that he could overcome his inner demons and attempted to help him do so. And so they returned to her estate 100 miles north of New York City, where Aja-Orisha attempted to put Sergei Kravinoff through the Yansan An ritual. He was buried after being given the herbs and potions and expected to face his demons for 2 weeks like she did, but then after only 4 days he emerged and attacked in a fit of madness. Sergei and Aja then struggled for several hours before she finally subdued him. She spent the next month nursing him back to health, during which time Takar blamed his mother for putting the only father figure he'd ever known through such an ordeal. Sergei's body eventually recovered, but his mind was never quite the same. He returned to his worldly travels, leaving for months at a time, but always came back to regale Takar with tales of his exploits. When the boy was 14, he decided to join Sergei, and the two left together, with Takar changing his name to Gregor Kravinoff. After that, Sergei co-opted the Baluaye teachings he'd learned from Aja-Orisha and other rare herbal potions stolen from the Belgian Congo to continue enhancing his speed and strength while keeping he and Gregor young. He spent the next 10 years in Africa, his skills as a big game hunter quickly affording him considerable wealth and fame. During this time, he evidently had an undocumented encounter with the savage mutant Sabretooth. As he sharpened his skills and solidified his reputation, he became known far and wide by his anglicized alias, Kraven the Hunter. At some point, he also reunited with his former servant, Dmitri Smerdyakov, who used the skills he'd mastered as a Soviet spy to export the ivory and animal skins that Sergei had accumulated. In return, Kraven provided Dmitri with jungle herbs that slowed his aging as well. Seeking greater challenges, he traveled the world over the following years, on at least one occasion hunting prehistoric creatures in the hidden jungles of the Savage Land. In the late 1950s, he was romantically involved with the Atlantean adventurer Namora, the cousin of Namor. In 1959, both Kraven and Namora joined a group of Avengers assembled by Nick Fury and helped them on several missions to hunt down escaped Nazi war criminals. Other members of this group included Ulysses Bloodstone, Dum-Dum Dugan, Dominic Fortune, and the aforementioned Sabretooth. Kraven returned to his solo adventures after that and regularly shared stories of his exploits with other nobles. Soon he caught the attention of a woman named Sasha Alexandra Nikolaevna. Like Sergei, she was the child of Russian nobility. Before the rise of the Soviet Union, her father, Mikhail, was also a Grand Duke, and her mother, who she was named after, was a princess of Montenegro. Interestingly, she was also descended from members of the hidden Inhuman race, although it doesn't seem that she was ever aware of this particular lineage. Since Sergei was one of the few white Russian emigres who still possessed any level of wealth, Sasha conspired with her father, who wanted her to marry into the Kravinoff family, thereby ensuring their own social standing. She confronted him at a party held by another Russian family in France, where she threw her drink in his face and feigned moral outrage at his big game hunting. She ran off and he ran after her, her strategy of reverse psychology obscuring the fact that, for once, he was the one being hunted. Ultimately, her plan worked as Sergei opened up to her, explaining that during a hunt was the only time that the pain of living faded away, and that he was grateful for the fall of the monarchy as it allowed him to experience a purer existence in the wild. Sasha soon caught a glimpse of one source of Sergei's pain when his mother, who was attending the same party, experienced another psychotic episode after months of lucidity. Anna Kravinoff was taken away and Sergei was once again reminded of how people said that his mother was insane. Sasha comforted and stayed with Kraven that night, which proved to be the beginning of a long-standing relationship. However, she had no interest in sharing her victory, and the following morning she murdered her own father by throwing him down an elevator shaft. As for Sergei's mother, she eventually took her own life, but the scars that she left in her wake would stay with Kraven for the rest of his. But in any event, the hunter finally had a woman worthy of being his wife, and Alexandra Nikolaevna soon became Sasha Kravinoff. Then in 1961, Sergei and Sasha had a child of their own, Vladimir. Born in Ekaterinburg, Russia, Vladimir Kravinoff benefited from his father's wealth, but Sergei was usually absent while away on his travels. Vladimir's care was largely entrusted to Gregor Kravinoff, who acted as a surrogate father, much like Sergei had done for him. Gregor taught Vladimir from a young age, passing on hunting techniques that he himself had learned from Kraven. Vladimir took to these skills quickly, and when he was still relatively young, Gregor dropped him into a forest in northern Maine for a rite of passage. There, Vladimir was attacked by a masked man claiming to be the Grim Hunter, a mythical warrior that Gregor had told him stories about as a child. In truth, the masked attacker was Sergei Kravinoff himself, who was impressed with Vladimir's skills and began training the boy personally. Over the following years, Vladimir honed his skills while living in his ancestral home in the Ural Mountains with Gregor, eventually adopting the name Grim Hunter as his own alias. He was also entrusted with the secret of his father's herbal potions and gained similar strength, speed, and longevity. At the same time, Sergei Kravinoff did not remain loyal to his wife while continuing his worldly travels. One such affair produced an illegitimate offspring, Alyosha Kravinoff. Born and raised in the African jungle, Alyosha was kept separated from the rest of his family. While Kraven sent tutors to provide him with an education, Alyosha's human contact outside of that was extremely limited, and he considered the wild animals he encountered his only real friends. A mutant like his unidentified mother, he possessed the ability to communicate with these animals, however he himself would become savage and animalistic when angered. Now, another illegitimate child, Ned Tannengarten, grew up to become a Hollywood producer, although the details of his birth are largely undocumented, and so it is possible that there are others we don't know about. Much later, Kraven did have one more child with his wife Sasha, a daughter named Anastasia Tatiana Kravinoff. Usually known simply as Anna, this youngest child was raised primarily by her mother, who taught her to be proud of her noble heritage. Like her older brother Vladimir, Anna displayed a talent for hunting when she was a child, but unlike him, she never even met her father. You see, Anna was born just as the Marvel Age of Heroes was beginning, and the world was introduced to the wall-crawling wonder known as the Amazing Spider-Man. And one of the first foes this new hero faced was Dmitri Smerdyakov, who by this point had become the international criminal known as the Chameleon. After his initial defeat, Smerdyakov contacted Kraven, believing that his old friend could defeat the masked wall crawler. The hunter of course relished the opportunity to stalk a new kind of prey and returned to America with fanfare and press coverage. He also made a public spectacle during his arrival when he arranged for several animals he brought with him to escape from their cages, allowing Kraven to demonstrate his prowess by quickly recapturing the wild snakes and gorillas. During this trip, he also provided Smerdyakov with another dose of his jungle potion, giving him enough to strengthen his aging body but still leaving him weaker than Kraven and his legitimate family. Furthermore, Sergei manipulated and gaslit the Chameleon, encouraging his delusion that they were close childhood friends. Turning his attention towards his prey, Kraven observed Spider-Man while the hero stopped a late-night robbery that was orchestrated by the Chameleon. Shortly afterwards, in their first real encounter, Kraven was confident but quickly surprised by the smaller man's considerable strength, and so he decided to gain the upper hand by scratching the spider with a potion that threw him off balance before escaping. The following night, the hunter lured Spider-Man into a trap using a disguised chameleon as a decoy. In the end, however, Spider-Man's own speed, stealth, and intelligence allowed him to gain the upper hand, first by defeating and unmasking the chameleon, and then by luring the hunter into a trap of his own, catching him in a super strong spider web. Unable to move, Kraven accepted his defeat and waited for his foe to finish him, but much to his surprise, death never came. Instead, he and the chameleon were found by the authorities, arrested, and put on a ship and sent to be deported. The following nights, Kraven was tormented by the same nightmares that he'd had since he was a child, of being trapped in the same squalid asylum where his mother was sent, helpless and covered in spiders. In that moment, through the rage and fear, he began to see Spider-Man as the personification of the Kraven family's disgrace and dishonor. Furthermore, by letting him live, Spider-Man had tarnished the hunter's reputation and damned Sergei Kravinoff to suffer the dishonor of defeat himself. Thus began Kraven's obsession with claiming victory over the spider and proving his superiority, even if it cost him his life. And so he and the chameleon then paid to have themselves smuggled back into the United States. Although as luck would have it, the two made a landfall near a Stark munitions factory, and Kraven came face to face with the armored Avenger, Iron Man. While the hunter was confident, suffice it to say that that was not a fight that he could win. He ultimately escaped again and was recruited by Dr. Octopus into joining his Sinister Six. While Kraven had no interest in fighting alongside the other villains, he agreed to play a part in their plot to make Spider-Man fight them one after the other. Technically, Spider-Man didn't really defeat Kraven in that encounter, but rather simply avoided his attacks until he could steal the location of his next opponent and escape. After that, Kraven returned to one of his African estates to replenish his herbal potions and plan his next move. Meanwhile, he was also contacted by the Green Goblin, who offered Kraven a significant reward if he was successful in defeating Spider-Man. After a failed attempt in which Spider-Man escaped after Kraven was momentarily distracted by the Goblin's presence, the hunter met with an agent of the Green Goblin and demanded half of his promised payment up front. When the agent refused, Kraven followed him home and learned that it was none other than industrialist Norman Osborn, but didn't suspect the true connection between Osborn and the Goblin. Returning to his mission, Kraven usurped the Chameleon's abandoned hideout and lured Spider-Man into another encounter by impersonating him and threatening the newspaper magnate J. Jonah Jameson. This time, however, the Spider began to prove that he was actually more than a physical match for Kraven. In the end, the hunter was overpowered, defeated, and left for the police. Considering himself a man of honor, he confessed that he was the one who threatened Jameson and subsequently spent several months in prison. After being released, he attempted to extort money from the Osborn family, believing that the Goblin still owed him. That led to another battle with Spider-Man, during which Kraven unleashed a new weapon, a paralyzing electro ray fired from the eyes of his lion's head vest. He successfully incapacitated Spider-Man, albeit temporarily, and confronted Norman Osborn. However, Osborn was suffering from amnesia at the time, and so when he claimed to have no connection to the Goblin, Kraven could sense that he was telling the truth, and assumed that the Green Goblin had tricked him somehow. Spider-Man recovered again, but Kraven the Hunter had already declared himself victorious and ran off. Spidey may have gone after him, but a dazed Osborn nearly fell off the building they were on to his doom, prompting the hero to save him instead. But not long after that, before Kraven had even left New York again, another target caught his eye, Blackie Drago, a criminal who had usurped the costumed identity of the Vulture. Wishing to again prove his superiority, the Hunter tracked down and attacked Drago, but their fight was interrupted by Spider-Man, who ultimately defeated both villains. Growing increasingly frustrated by the wall crawler, Kraven also encountered other heroes during this time. Taking refuge in an abandoned zoo, he sold snake venom-derived hallucinogens to the Magia, but was thwarted by the Human Torch. He also briefly hunted the X-Man known as the Beast, slowing him with a selection of toxins. However, the Beast's mutant physiology reacted differently than Kraven expected, sending him into a berserker rage. Ironically, Kraven had to be rescued by the other X-Men, after which Jean Grey erased their existence from his memory. Kraven then returned to the Savage Land to hunt and capture the last surviving saber-toothed tiger, Zabu. He successfully brought the Smilodon back to New York, but was pursued by Zabu's human partner, Kazar. Both men were injured in the ensuing fight, but when Kazar survived a stun blast that was strong enough to take down a raging tiger, Kraven respected his strength and fled with the intention of facing him again after they both recovered. To this end, he traveled again to the Savage Land, this time coming upon a crashed alien spaceship. Inside, he discovered a small, frightened creature, a member of a semi-reptilian anthropoid race called the Siln. The only other being on board was a female member of the same species who did not survive the journey. Recognizing that the creature was more than a wild animal, Kraven adopted the male, and within days it had more than doubled in size. As time went on, this rapid growth only accelerated, and so Kraven named his new friend Gog after the biblical giant. After reaching a height of 30 feet, Gog came upon an expedition on the edge of the Savage Land that included college students Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. Gog abducted Stacy, and Kraven decided that once he defeated Kazar and became the new king of the Savage Land, he would make her his queen. However, this time Spider-Man and Kazar joined forces to rescue Gwen and oppose Kraven. In the ensuing fight, Spider-Man lured Gog away, leading him to a pit of quicksand where the large creature was trapped. Kazar, meanwhile, challenged the Hunter, and while Kraven nearly succeeded in hanging his foe, a well-timed kick from the Jungle Lord sent the Hunter stumbling backwards off a cliff, seemingly to his doom. But was this truly the end for Kraven the Hunter? Well, no, but if you want to know what happens next, you'll have to let me know in the comments. In the meantime, if you want to read a Kraven story for yourself, then be sure to check out Kraven's Last Hunt if you haven't already, because it is an all-time classic. But that is all I have for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. As always, let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And of course, I do need to populate those polls with options, so if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments below. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!